All right. So Donald Trump has now won. He's going to become the president of the United States of America for the second time after a gap of 4 years. So what is fundamentally different? What do we need to hold our breath for? The basic first question for the entire globe has to be, will Trump end the war in Ukraine? This is easier said than done. Because remember, Ukrainian lives have been lost, Russian lives have been lost. The question now is, what kind of a face-saver mechanism can be found in order to end the war in Ukraine? He has said he'll do it, but what and how? Does he simply cut support for the Ukrainians and foster a Ukrainian surrender and the Russian takeover of the entire country? Not feasible. Does he let the Russians occupy large parts of the Ukraine? Not feasible. Does he demand of the Russians to simply vacate the Crimea and all the territories that they're occupying? Not easily done. There will have to be some assurance that the Ukrainians will not join NATO, which they haven't been able to do anyway, will not join the EU, which the EU has delayed anyway, to find some sort of exit. But all of this easier said than done. But that's the fundamental first question. The fundamental second question, will Trump cut funding to NATO? Donald Trump, for the past 8 years, has been saying that America spends too much money on NATO, and the European powers, who are all cutting their defense budgets, neither supply enough weaponry, arms, personnel or funding to NATO. So the Americans will cut it. He's done it before. He is expected to do it again, to the point that the NATO Secretary General spoke out that, listen, business will carry on as always. It will, but it also won't. We've already seen France make an appeal to other European countries that we will now have to figure out our destiny on our own. So keep an eye out on that. Will Donald Trump ease sanctions on Russia? You can argue it both ways, that the Russian sanctions either have worked wondrously or have worked not at all. Russia has not been brought to her knees. Has it been affected? For sure, in its dollar trade. You will have to do something on this in order to get the Russians back on the table to deal with the war on Ukraine. So will he do it? Big question hanging in the air. Will Donald Trump restart the tariff wars with China? This was the hallmark of his first presidency. Now the Chinese, incidentally, have undercut this. They have utilized the successor of NAFTA. All the Chinese manufacturers are now shifting to Mexico. Mexico-America trade is shooting up year on year. So a route has been found out, but the tariff wars with China, expect something to happen on this front, and expect thereby something to happen in the revision of the North American Free Trade Agreement and the movement of Chinese company goods through the Mexican border into America. The other big question hanging in the air, will Israel now need a Gaza exit plan? Now you have to understand, here we are a year later since October 7. Joe Biden was a self-proclaimed, self-confessed Zionist, a strong supporter of Israel. Even though his administration has critiqued some of the policies, some of the issues, and indeed the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, they have not pressurized Israel or been unable to pressurize Israel to exit Gaza. The war, in fact, has expanded to Lebanon, has expanded to attacks on Iran. You can even compute that the Netanyahu administration made a judgment call that if an attack had to take place in Iran, best to take place before the American election results are out. Maybe, just maybe, the timing was in question there. But will Donald Trump, who's been more difficult with Israel during his first presidency, now say, guys, you need to get out of Gaza? But on the other hand, Donald Trump was very, very tough on Iran. So the next big question, of course, is, will he ramp up action against Iran? This was another hallmark feature of his foreign policy during his first presidency, including the assassination of top Iranian leaders that took place 4 years ago. The other big question hanging in the air as the globe digests the results coming from the world's so far only superpower, will there be tax cuts? And if there will be tax cuts, as we all suspect them, will this be a boost to the American economy, therefore the global economy? All the stock markets are up. Heck, Bitcoin is up on the Trump election. Or will this actually lead to more inflation, because the inflation was caused by all the trillions of dollars pumped into the global economy due to COVID? Big question hanging in the air, and all our fates hang in the balance on this. The other big question for the global community: will oil prices come down? Now, America, we forget, is now energy independent. It produces all the oil and gas it needs for its own consumption. Traditionally, the Republicans are more in favor of the fracking that needs to take place in Alaska to make that happen. But the Democrats under Biden didn't halt it either on environmental concerns. But will Donald Trump be more bullish on the oil and gas industry? Probably. If that happens, can more American oil and gas come into the global markets? Maybe. There can be a strategic move, in fact, to bring in more oil and gas, because as the oil prices decrease, who hurts? The Saudis hurt, but the Iranians and Russians hurt even more. So there might be a chance that oil and gas prices come down. If Ukraine sees a resolution, if the Israelis are exiting Gaza and the global situation seems to stabilize, more oil comes into the market, oil prices might just go down. Will China plus one accelerate? The Americans are pushing a $250 billion plan to bring semiconductor manufacturing back on shore. They want products, including semiconductors, electronics, and other high-end technologies to be built outside of China. So will China plus one accelerate? Probably. Probably. More tariff wars. Can we write off China? No. But is it likely to happen? Yes. It's headed in that direction. The final big question that's hanging in the air, because as we've been obsessed with what's happening in Ukraine, and then I've been obsessed with what's happening in West Asia and the Middle East, we've forgotten what the Chinese are doing in the South China Sea. Just last week, they conducted their first dual carrier aircraft carrier exercises. What they're doing in the Philippines, what they're doing with Vietnam, what they're doing with Japan, and what they're doing on Taiwan. Now, there is a mutual defense treaty, but the question is, a Donald Trump who says, no war in my time, will he actually threaten to commit troops to the ground in Taiwan in order to defend that sovereign country? Big question hanging in the air.
Absolutely. There are some very interesting aspects that are